Great job, band. Y'all killed it on that last song. I really appreciated that. It was so just powerful hearing the piano and the drums and the guitar all going together. That was great. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. It is definitely a joy to be able to worship along with you guys each and every week. And thank you, Tiffany, for reading in chapter 11 for us. We've had some long, challenging chapters the past few weeks, so thank you to our readers, Summer and Tiffany, the past 2 weeks for reading those for us. So, we just got done looking at chapter 11 through the help of Tiffany reading that for us. A lot of names in here. So they go through and list all these kinds of different people, and as much as I would love to, we're not going to dive into each of these characters. We could do a whole study just on chapter 11 alone, just kind of diving into the history of each of these people listed here and answering the question of why did the author of Hebrews choose to list this person and not this other person. That's a really interesting way of approaching chapter 11, but that would take a long time to do that. But instead, I want us to look at 3 different themes that I think we see come out from chapter 11. And the themes are this: faith. We see this theme of faith, and that's the most obvious and apparent theme that we see. The word faith itself appears roughly 25 times or so throughout this chapter. So that's definitely the main driving point behind this chapter. We'll dive into that a little bit more. But we also see this theme of dwelling place. We'll kind of dive into a little bit and look at what the author's talking about there. And we also see the theme of, you might have guessed it, better. Better appears a few times in chapter 11, and I think is a key part of understanding what the author is trying to communicate to us here in chapter 11. But the first one, faith. This chapter has been labeled by a lot of people as the Hall of Faith, kind of taking off the idea of Hall of Fame and going with Hall of Faith here, and rightly so. Because it mentions faith, like I said, roughly 25 times or so. But it does kind of beg a couple questions for us. First of all, what is faith? Faith is mentioned a lot in this chapter. Faith, if you've been raised in church at all, is a word that I'm sure you're super common with. But instead of rushing past that, something we're super familiar with and comfortable with that terminology, let's pause for a second, and then we'll press play, and think about what is faith. Anybody out there? What is faith? Verse 1, okay. Go with it.
Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen.
Yeah, so the author of Hebrews tells us right here what faith is, okay? But let's dig a little deeper. What does this mean? What does he mean that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen? This is a verse I've had memorized for a long time, and through familiarity with it, I've kind of just skimmed over it without ever really meditating on it and soaking and kind of chewing on that idea for an extended amount of time. And I think a lot of us are probably in that same boat, that we're familiar with this verse, but have we ever really paused to think about it in depth? Gracie, you got something you want to add? Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Yeah, faith is, I messed up. All right, is, as Anna and Gracie have been putting it, the author of Hebrews states it pretty plainly, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. What does that mean? I think we get an example in verse 13. Go down to verse 13. He lists a bunch of people here. He kind of starts off with Abel, and then Abraham, and Jacob, and a few other people. Verse 13, he says, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. Okay, so it's kind of playing off this idea that he introduces chapter 12 with the conviction of things not seen. So it's being Convicted, it's having a deep assurance within ourselves that even though we can't see this taking place, we know that it's going to happen. And these saints, all these ones listed here, died not having received those promises, but still died in faith, still died believing that those things were going to come true with 100% assurance, with 100% conviction that these things will come true. They saw them from afar, and they greeted them. They greeted them with an assurance, knowing that beyond a shadow of a doubt, these things are going to happen. That Christ, the Messiah, is going to come, and he's going to come in a better way. And we'll get into that in just a minute. I think we get an example of that back up to verse 7. I think we kind of get an example of that taking place with Noah. Noah specifically is mentioned here. Verse 7 says, "By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household." So, going with that theme of faith, he was warned by God concerning events that had not happened yet. In Noah's day, there was no such thing as rain. There was no such thing as flooding. He yet had faith. He had conviction and assurance that what God said was true and it was going to happen beyond a shadow of a doubt. And he, in reverent fear, constructed an ark, which was lunacy in that day because there's no reason for an ark. But he had the assurance, he had the conviction that what God said was going to be true, even though he hadn't seen it yet. Even though there was no visible evidence of that happening at that time, he lived out that faith and belief that controlled what he did. Okay? So the theme of really the entire chapter 11 is this idea of faith that is closely connected to perseverance. Perseverance is the demonstration of faith. And so when you look at each of these characters, they persevered. We're looking at Noah right now. He persevered in building the ark. It didn't just take him a day to throw up a boat that his family could get on. No, he spent years upon years building this thing. He persevered, even though there was absolutely no evidence at that time that he would need a boat. He had the conviction and the assurance that God had said it, and therefore it was going to come true. And so he persevered. And that's kind of the true for every single one of these characters that we look at, that they persevered through faith and knowing that what God said was going to come true. Think of Abraham. What was the promise given to Abraham? Yeah. Did Abraham ever see his descendants as many as the sands of the seashore or the stars in the sky? No. And so that kind of goes back to verse 13, where it talks about these all died in faith. Abraham died believing that promise, that his descendants were going to grow and expand and become as numerous as the sands on the seashore and the stars in the sky. And so they persevered all throughout their life, believing that promise that came from God. Okay? Has anybody ever been to Niagara Falls? Few adults, okay? No students ever been to Niagara Falls? Everybody ever seen pictures of Niagara Falls? Everybody know what I'm talking about? All right, got a picture for you guys here. Niagara Falls. Here's a modern-day picture of it. It's kind of scaled to size, so I want to make sure there's a boat in the picture to kind of, so you can see the grand majesty of it. A huge, huge waterfall that is incredibly impressive, and the amount of water that comes down creates this mist that kind of spews up, and that's kind of what you see in the middle of the picture there. If you take the ferry to the falls, you're kind of covered in mist. You gotta, even though you're not actually getting underneath the falls itself, you have to wear like rain jackets and stuff because you'll get soaked just from the mist, the spew from the amount of water pouring over it. Well, I think there's a good analogy that helps us, I think, understand faith. And there's a guy named Charles Blondin back in 1859, so a long, long time ago, when this probably looked a good bit different. It wasn't near as developed at that point, but he was a very talented tightrope walker. And what he did is he attached a tightrope from one side of Niagara Falls to the other side and performed all kinds of tricks going back and forth across that tightrope. He would, first of all, walk across it and gathered huge, huge crowds to see one of the most talented tightrope walkers possibly ever. And he wouldn't just walk across it back and forth. So imagine having a tightrope across that. If you fall off that tightrope, huh? Yeah, there's rocks. Your chance of survival are very, very limited. And so, but he would walk across, but then he would go a step further. He would even walk across blindfolded. He would walk across backwards. One time, he walked across the tightrope backwards, which imagine how difficult that would be. I can't tightrope going forwards. I can't even walk back. You're right. I can't even walk backwards. I tried doing slacklining. Anybody ever tried slacklining before? I'm awful at it. So I can't even slackline. But this guy was so talented that he would walk backwards across it. And when he walked backwards across it, on the other side, he grabbed a wheelbarrow and came across with the wheelbarrow again and did all kinds of feats. He would, No, they didn't. Yeah. So he brought the wheelbarrow back across, and as he came across, he would do different kind of tricks in it. I think at one point he actually got in the wheelbarrow himself while balancing on there, and would pick up the wheelbarrow, did all kinds of amazing things that you couldn't imagine. And he would come back across, and remember, there's huge crowds here, and they would ooh and ah and congratulate him and huge applause. It was a big spectacle. And he would say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." How many people believe I could do that again? And everybody would raise their hand and hoop and holler, say, "How many people believe I could do that blindfolded with the wheelbarrow?" And everybody raised their hand and hoop and holler, and so he would do that and came back. I believe he did that blindfolded with the wheelbarrow. And then he came back and he was like, "All right, how many people believe that I could tote somebody across here?" And everybody raised their hand, hoot and holler, said, "All right, need a volunteer." Nobody raised their hand. And so it showed an example, it's like a great example of belief, but lack of faith. If they truly had faith that he could do it, they would have jumped into the wheelbarrow. There's a difference between believing in something and having faith in something. Anna, do you have something you want to add? You're going to ruin my analogy? All right. So I think that's a good explanation and kind of picture of what faith is for us. The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. This idea of persevering through that. Think of faith is closely attached to perseverance. And so if somebody were to truly have faith that Charles Blondin was able to tote somebody across that in a wheelbarrow, then they would have the perseverance to act on that faith, to walk forward, to get themselves in that wheelbarrow, and to persevere to stay in that wheelbarrow and not jump out, not wiggle, because that would have made things a lot more difficult the whole way across. But nobody had the perseverance and the faith to be able to do so. So faith is a huge part of this chapter in understanding what the author is talking about. All right. Second theme that I think we see in here is this idea of dwelling place. We see a few different words that kind of point in this direction. Words like homeland, city, country, tent, several different words that kind of talk about homeland or dwelling place, where somebody dwells. And it's connected a little bit with our last theme of better. And it as we see the different mentions in here, talks about how Abraham, let's go to we'll start in verse 15. Look at verse 15 with me. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. So there we see this idea of dwelling place in its different forms, kind of connects with our last theme of better, and the fact that we have a better homeland. We have a better city, a better country coming to us. And that's described more so in Revelation chapter 21, verse 9 through 27. So if you want to look more at that, we see that a better country, a better homeland, a better city is in store for us who are followers of Christ. And the point is this. I think you probably know this. who was it? There was a band that talked about this world is not our home. And I think that's the point of one of the main themes here that we see in Hebrews 11 is that this world is not our home. All Christians, every single Christian, are pilgrims in land that is not our own. The sandcastles of this world must not distract us from the heavenly city that awaits. In that city, we put our hope. And so the question is, what city are we putting our hope into? And what we have here on this earth, or what awaits for us? Are we persevering in the hope of something better awaiting us? Or are we clinging to the things here on earth that are slipping away, are like wind that is here one day and gone the next? The people of God don't look backward. They look forward because they are absolutely convinced that God's promises are true. They're absolutely convinced that what lies ahead of me as a follower of Christ, being reunited with my Heavenly Father, is way, way better than anything that I could obtain here on this earth. And so that leads to our last theme that we see. Better, the word better is mentioned 4 different times in this chapter. And we see it first in verse 16. We kind of looked at that, and then we see it a few other places. And so we talked about how back in chapter 10, look back at chapter 10 with me. Chapter 10, verse 19, the author begins this transition of, in the first 9.5 chapters, really kind of giving us mostly information about Jesus, showing us that Jesus is better and demonstrating that in multiple ways. And in verse 19 of chapter 10, he begins transitioning from information to application, to what does this mean for us? In light of what he has said in the first 9.5 chapters, what does that mean? And so, and I think one of the big things he's talking about here is in line with everything he's been saying throughout Hebrews, that Jesus is better. And since Jesus is better, we as followers of Jesus have something better in store for us. We have a better country. We have, verse 26, greater wealth. We have verse 35, so they might rise again to a better life. Verse 40, since God had provided something better for us. As followers of Christ, since we're attached to Jesus, we have something better because Jesus himself is better. We had a question from our Sunday night group about what verse 40 means, and I want to address that. Let's read verse 40. Let's actually back up to verse 39 because it's attached to that. It says, in all these, so this is kind of conclusion after listing all these people that lived out by faith. It says, in all these people that I mentioned, though commended through their faith, they did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us. And apart from us, they should not be made perfect. And it's a little bit confusing in there, kind of what the author is talking about. And remember that this is attached to the fact that the author of Hebrews has been talking about a covenant that's coming through Jesus, a covenant that's way better than the covenant that we saw in the Old Testament. And that covenant is between God and the people of God, the church. We see this beautiful union between the church and Christ, the bride and the groom, that's kind of explained in several different ways throughout the New Testament. And apart from the new covenant, there is no hope of perfect fellowship with God on the last day. And so that's what the author of Hebrews is talking about here in this verse and saying, apart from this covenant that Christ has come to establish in this new covenant age, apart from that, what these Old Testament saints looked for and hoped for, Abel, Noah, Abraham, all these people mentioned, they were looking forward to in faith, being made perfect through the new covenant that would come through Jesus Christ. And if Christ wouldn't have come, then they would not have been made perfect through their faith. And so that, I think, is what the author is talking about there in verse 40. Some challenging things in Hebrews, and I'm glad you guys are bringing those to my attention as we kind of think through those and wrestle through those. But that's one of the more challenging verses here in this chapter. So, bringing it all together, to a conclusion. Challenge. I give you guys a challenge every single week. And this challenge is a series of questions for us that I want us to ponder. If you want to write these down, you're welcome to write them down. But the first question is this, and it'll be on the screen for you. Is your faith being demonstrated to those around you by your perseverance? Could those in your life see the way that you persevere in your walk with Christ? Know that you have a solid, strong faith that is built on a foundation that will not waver, that is built upon Jesus Christ. Do they know that in full assurance, in full conviction, just by looking at your life? I want us to think about that for a minute. Second question is this. Is your life characterized by a love for this home here, or by an anticipation for the eternal home that awaits you? Are you more concerned with what this world has to offer you, or are you eagerly waiting with anticipation for the perfect city, the perfect home, the perfect country that God is preparing for you in eternity? What are you more consumed by? What dwelling place captures your attention and your affection more so? The third question is this. Do you truly believe that Jesus and what he has to offer is better? That's the whole theme of Hebrews, is that Jesus is better. And therefore, since Jesus is better, what he has to offer is better. And living your life in accord with what he says, what his commands are, following after him, abiding in him, is better than anything else you can attach your life to. And so do you truly believe that? Does your life show that by what you say, by what you do, by the people you hang out with, and the things that you focus on day in and day out? So those are the three challenges. I want to give us some time to just reflect on those. If Paul has music, we can play that in the background. If not, we'll just have a moment of silence. If you want to, you can come forward and spend some time in prayer. That's completely up to you. But I want us to spend just a few minutes reflecting on this and asking these questions to ourselves introspectively. Take a look inward and see where you fall with these three questions. Father, thank you that you are better, that your Son and what he came here to accomplish, and through that accomplishment offers us as children of God, is so much better than me pursuing after my own desires, Father. Lord, I pray that that truth would resonate with every single one of us in here. Lord, and we change how we approach our lives, how we respond to the things in our lives, to our parents, to our homework, to the friends in our lives, Father. Lord, help us to live out that truth in a real way, in a tangible way that is evident to everyone who views our lives. Pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, you guys are dismissed. Appreciate you next Sunday. We have anything between now and Sunday? Saturday, banquet. Yes, banquet. Don't forget about the banquet from 4 to 6. So we'll see you guys at the banquet.